Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, April 22nd, 2021. I guess we finally made it to Earth Day, right? We're on actual Earth Day. So congratulations to Earth and all the people who live on it, I guess. What do we call ourselves? Earthlings, Terrans, Gaians? What terminology are we using? Today's the day to celebrate the Earth. So in the words of, let's say, the immortal sages Duran Duran, this is planet Earth. And apparently you're looking at planet Earth. You know the whole. Isn't that what we do? Is this how you celebrate Earth Day? I'm not entirely sure. I guess we'll roam the Earth for the bulk of the day. It's been many years, of course, since Earth Day's been established. I've never been entirely clear on, other than the celebration of all things environmental, which I guess was the idea. But I always feel like, do we sing happy birthday to the Earth? Is there a cake of any kind? I guess there certainly could be, but it doesn't seem like a day until there's some formal celebration of it. Of course, Eastern Orthodox Earth Day next month, I guess. I don't know. Not certain when I'll give that joke up, but probably no time soon. So, all right, let's enjoy it and celebrate the fact that we're dealing with a polluted and sickly Earth under the influence of a pandemic. Let's see. I did see this morning that the usual suspects are, of course, out protesting today. The White House has announced some sort, I have no means by which to evaluate it, of course, but the headlines that they're trying to generate are about President Biden's intention to commit during some environmental summit upcoming. I don't know whether I don't think it's today, although today would have been a great day to do the whole Earth Day thing. But committing to a 50+% reduction in carbon emissions over some period of future years. I don't track these things closely enough to be entirely sure what the numbers are, but I saw them flying by in the headlines today. I'm sure we can round those things up and get a fix on those things, but it doesn't really matter because apparently the folks, the good fun folks from the Sunrise Movement, are apparently marching towards the White House. Maybe they've made it there already, since I have seen the video of them walking with some round number of wheelbarrows full of cow manure to protest what they believe to be the BS proposal being made by Joe Biden. Because, of course, the only people that know anything about saving anything are them. So, congratulations to them and their monopoly on Earth. They're doing very well with this stuff. They're very active, and it's good to push. And you're never supposed to be satisfied. It doesn't make any sense as activists to be satisfied. And look, they're no more annoying than anybody else. So I think they're entitled. Besides which, Earth, we love it. Do you not? Okay. Terrific. So let's push forward with things and see what else is going on here. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now here on Earth. We are reliably informed by Bill, who is in Portland, Earth. It is Earth Day, and today all of my fancy broadcasting hardware is powered by switchgrass. Why not? True. A great idea. And we ought to find some natural sort of fuel for this thing. Could we convert this thing to being powered by, pedal power, bicycle? If I could get like a flywheel and some pedals in here, I think we could probably pedal up our own energy for it. I've got the battery backup here in case we get tired, so we should be all right. And now that we can put some numbers to exactly what sort of voltage and whatnot we'll actually need, maybe we could store this stuff up. All right, well, let's see. We're trying to catch up on a number of other items that are playing in the news today, and I've been pocketing a number of things, but I see I've got some sort of an update on my, I don't know what, on the phone, on Twitter, I guess, today. There's a new format for parking things in Pocket. I have my doubts whether everything I tapped on today, in fact, got parked there. But, all right, yeah, looking pretty good, as a matter of fact. And, of course, Greg Dworkin, already here, as you've heard, here with a raft of stories, most of which, I understand, take place on Earth. Is that right, Greg? Good morning.
More or less. Good morning. You know,
right.
It is
There's
Earth
some
Day.
Mars stories.
Earth Day always makes me feel a little bad during the Trump era.
Every day is Earth Day.
Because I feel like the flat earthers and the Planet Pizza, it's only a disc. Folks get a short shrift because everything is cute these days. I mean, what happened to the moon landing was faked, folks. It's just like nobody's paying attention to that.
Right. And you would think the cheese lobby would be very upset about that.
Something like that, you know, or the moon being made of, pizza cheese or whatever it is that they do. It's like the Onion, you know. It's not funny when it's like it's not even satire anymore.
Yeah. Well, yes, we have lots of people who still believe in this, and I don't know, maybe it's in even increasing numbers. Cute people haven't gone away.
No, not they haven't. And of course, the bullhorns and the economic anxiety hasn't gone away either. Yeah, for example, yesterday the Senate confirmed, even without Kamala Harris breaking the tiebreaker vote, because Lisa Murkowski came along with the Democrats, Vanita Gupta is now the number 3 in the Justice Department. The Justice Department, despite broad GOP oppositionists, NBC News puts it. Okay. And I was trying to figure out exactly what it was that they were opposed to. And it was really difficult to tell because most of the muddled message that the GOP was doing is that these are far left radical. You know the phrase, every Democrat is a far left radical. So these are far left radicals who believe in liberal justice. And so the fact that she and some of the other nominees that the Biden administration is putting forward, particularly Kristen Clark, also tapped for a high-ranking position, are extreme and radical is obviously economic anxiety.
Yes.
Because the fact that they're women of color has nothing to do with it.
No, that just happens to happen a lot with the Biden administration. I don't know why.
But they've decided, and Mitch McConnell made a big show of saying, these are far-left radicals, and it's our job to oppose them.
Yes, even if they had been themselves appointed to these positions, that is what Republicans would say about it.
Right, and so they did, and they said it's basically our job to oppose it, and we're going to go on Fox News and tell our people that these are far-left radicals. Now, they got appointed, at least Gupta got appointed anyway, and it's good to have people who are competent and, who are going to do their jobs as opposed to the last administration, which is what makes this thing so absurd. Given the nonsense that was going on in the Justice Department during the last administration, it's such a breath of fresh air to actually see, for example, the Civil Rights Division actually look at stuff. Merrick Garland is looking yesterday at what's going on with the Minneapolis police force in a broad way is just so much more important than any punditry you could possibly, round up.
Yes.
So it's great. It's wonderful that these things are happening. And, of course, the GOP is completely opposed because they basically are the party of white supremacy, and they really get nervous about anybody who interferes with that. And I hate to put it any other way, but that's the economic anxiety behind, blocking these folks.
Yes. Well, you are right. I don't know any other way to put it. Okay. Want to make one up?
No, we can make one up. Okay. So, what else is happening in terms of the party of white supremacy? Weird. I am not a lawyer.
Weird, wild stuff.
And I don't play one on the internets. But the bizarre legal argument that conservative, hyper-conservative, ultra-conservative, ultra-orthodox lawyers are trying to make about how the Derek Chauvin conviction is simply going to lead to a mistrial because something Maxine Waters and something Joe Biden while the jury was sequestered is fairly amazing.
Well, then why sequester them at all?
They can't argue that it was incorrectly adjudicated.
No,
in the sense that the jury came to the correct decision, and the American public completely agrees. I mean, overwhelmingly.
Yes.
Not unanimous. It's never going to be unanimous. There's always 25% of economic anxiety voters. But, 70% or something along those lines, according to the polls, thought he was guilty. And so he was. He's a murderer. I mean, it's official. And they can't argue that because there's video. So they have to argue that, Maxine Waters, and therefore the whole thing's going to get thrown out.
Right. Well,
on what planet? On planet Pizza Disc?
Good question for today. I like it. Yeah, they mean this planet, but they're wrong. That's not where they live. But yeah, I mean, I think their argument was that it unduly influenced the jury, but of course that's extraordinarily difficult since they were in sequestration. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why the whole thing doesn't really go anywhere. But even so, I mean, even if they weren't really, the idea that they were somehow intimidated into changing their verdict because Maxine Waters said something is pretty far-fetched. It would be interesting to poll the jury and ask if they not only did they hear even after their sequestration what Maxine Waters said, or do they know who Maxine Waters is?
Well, the Attorney General, I think,
no reason to even
if I'm not mistaken, there were so many people speaking yesterday, but I think it was the Attorney General for Minnesota, Keith Ellison, who referenced the teen who took the video.
Yes.
That helped with all of this happening as a woman, Darnella Frazier,
right,
who got into good trouble.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I heard that, and I said,
was she in trouble at all?
That is like so right.
I mean,
and so Maxine Waters is saying, if this doesn't go the way we think, it's up to us as citizens to get into good trouble. And that's not a call for violence.
No.
Any more than anything John Lewis ever said was a call for violence. And so trying to make it into something it isn't is just part of the big lie that the white supremacist party is doing. It's so blatant
in their
now.
interest, certainly.
You can't even have plausible deniability about what you're doing. Maxine Waters, we're going to censor her. And also, we're not going to let any people of color, especially women of color, tell us what to do. We're not going to have them in justice because we don't want them looking at what we do. Oh, yeah. Well, why is that? Well, because economic anxiety.
Well, they like many of us here on planet Earth, they have to have a narrative. It actually reminds me of something I just saw sort of randomly today. There are Republicans objecting to the conclusion of the FBI that the shooter at the baseball practice a few years back, who shot
Steve Scalise,
that I guess the FBI had concluded that the guy was perhaps out for a suicide by cop.
Yeah.
And they might have reason to object to it, but they're very upset, apparently, at least one of the Republicans who was there, very upset about this conclusion and want the FBI to reopen the case and look at it again, I guess because they didn't get their left-wing terrorist narrative out of it. So they need the whole thing re-examined, which may or may not happen. We could trade them for a re-examination of the FBI's investigation into Brett Kavanaugh, but I don't think they're going to come to the table on that one. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think that's sort of part of what they're up for and up to. They got to have this
what
thing.
Are they saying? It isn't enough that the FBI didn't label him as Antifa. We want him exhumed so we could kill him again.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Pretty much that. They would like the label.
Do like that dude what was in Portland or whatever, that we just found him and just shot him before he had a chance to even say anything.
Yes, right. And
that's what we want.
And his name is not at our fingertips, which tells us something, too. It seems to be working on their part.
It isn't Kyle Rittenhouse who lived.
Right. Yeah, that guy we remember. Somehow. All right, well...
Well, because he's still left. Anyway, so let me just reference a couple of good articles on these topics. This one is from Andrew Fleischman, Arc Digital. Chauvin's conviction will almost certainly stand. I'm an appellate attorney. The case for overturning Chauvin's conviction is far weaker than many are claiming. Well, we know who the many are. As the experts see it, Chauvin's conviction will likely be reversed as the result of California Congresswoman Maxine Waters' public comments urging he be found guilty and President Joe Biden's comments suggesting he personally believes Chauvin to be guilty. But if there's anything these experts have in common, it's that none of them have ever tried to appeal a criminal conviction.
Oh, well, that might help in this case.
Well, at one time, a common belief was that criminals were regularly being let off the hook on technicalities. Today, for a number of reasons, courts are not inclined to overturn the decision of judges and juries who were actually present for witnesses' testimony. Courts understand that these were the people who saw and heard all of the evidence and presume that they came to an informed conclusion. At the same time, Jenny Suk Garrison is writing in The New Yorker, the vital role of bystanders in convicting Derek Chauvin. The former police officer's trial recalled a bygone mode of justice in which witnesses decided the defendant's fate. And so the narrow argument that they're using and the wider Republican Party problem is basically they're telling people who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Yeah. Well,
and lying eyes wins.
Yeah, they do a lot with these guys. Yeah, maybe I'll look around and grab it. I did see something else that I didn't park, but somebody who apparently has a little bit more expertise explaining why, no, this won't result in a mistrial.
Right. The odds of winning a criminal appeal, as in actually reversing the conviction and getting an acquittal or a new trial, generally hover around between 1% and 5%.
Yeah, that's true, too. Just generally speaking, the odds are long against it. And by the way, I don't know that it's the greatest outcome in the world for the right-wing politicians behind the idea of retrying Derek Chauvin.
Yeah, so he's guilty again. I don't know about that. So I'm just reading. I don't know these statistics off the top of my head. I'm just reading from Andrew Fleischman's article here.
I'll buy it.
The odds in Chauvin's case are particularly poor because the issue that critics of the decision have decided to focus on is an absolute dog's breakfast, a mash of half-remembered legal concepts Vitamixed and funneled into a thin blue line. And there's a few reasons for this. First, you generally can't ask jurors about the deliberations or what happened in the jury room. So if a juror wanted to testify, he always meant to convict Chauvin no matter what the evidence was because he was hell-bent on avenging George Floyd or because he was terrified a mob would burn the city. That's inadmissible.
All right, well, that's a problem for the people who would want to use that.
Minnesota courts have repeatedly held the only way to even get a hearing to see if a juror inappropriately considered external information is by providing evidence that they acted inappropriately. And the evidence must stand alone and unchallenged warrant the conclusion of jury misconduct. So unless one of the jurors wants to come forward and say they were bribed or threatened, defense isn't going to meet that threshold.
Okay, well, maybe we can change that law real quick.
Right? Even if a juror did come forward to say that Waters and Biden's statements influenced decision-making in this case, it's still probably inadmissible. Minnesota courts will let you ask about what kind of outside information a jury considered, like a police report that was never admitted, but the court doesn't let you ask the jury how it affected them. And despite this pretty clear rule, lots of politically motivated critics of the conviction have predicted a slam-dunk appeal for Chauvin. These are probably the same people who thought he'd be acquitted, by the way.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
The Bulwark racked up a pretty long list of commentators calling this mob justice or suggesting that those who saw this as the right result would not have accepted any other. But that gets to another problem with any potential appeal. Overwhelming evidence.
Yeah.
That you were just saying. If you try it again, I don't know why they want to do that.
You want to run this 9.5-minute video again?
Of how, how bad this was.
Yeah,
okay?
I mean,
it basically, basic concepts here. It's easier to win an appeal when the evidence is weak than when it's strong.
That is obviously, I think, what it should have been the obvious conclusion, but
they forget that stuff. But in this case, the jury was shown George Floyd's death, heard from multiple eyewitnesses describing their contemporaneous and recorded belief that Floyd was being murdered, which, by the way, he was, and that's official.
And actually was recorded.
Yeah. A Minnesota court might decide, as it has 729 times before, that any outside influence the jury might have experienced was irrelevant in light of the state's strong case. Now, that doesn't mean the appeal is hopeless, but these are not slam dunks or layups or jump shots. They are an attempt to sink a shot while perched precariously from the opposite basket. And you should read takes, whether from former federal prosecutors or professors of law, with the same skepticism you'd have for a friend who's just certain he could at least score 1 or 2 points against LeBron.
That's a pretty good metaphor. I think that works.
Right. I remember having that argument with somebody in college. Except the argument wasn't like if you were playing a professional NBA player. We're not talking about Michael Jordan, just your average NBA player. Could you even get a shot off?
Yeah.
That was the argument. Not whether you were going to score. There's no way you were going to score.
No. I mean, I guess unless you happen to luck out and throw a half-court thing before the guy even shows up.
Whatever, something like that. I could at least
That's
get
your
one
best
shot.
bet,
In a half hour playing, I could at least get a shot. No, when you're playing those guys, you couldn't even get a shot off.
Yeah, no, if I'm guarded, I don't have the ball.
Right.
Okay.
So, anyway, it was a pretty good summary of what's going on here. So, I have to say, with all due respect for my legal friends, I mean, after all, Mark Elias and some of the legal people and the prosecutors in this case who do outstanding things are in danger of having the legal profession in general go the way of the respect people have for economists when they try to, figure out what's going on with the pandemic and then opine that they're obviously the correct view because even though it's not their field, they've decided that they've done the research.
Yes, right. Oh, I've done that. That's
and that's why you look
there.
at an economist's view of what's going on with the pandemic and saying, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. You may be an expert in your field. You're not an expert in this field, right? And a legal degree doesn't make you an expert in prosecuting or defending redos. When you have these cases that come up and you think you're going to get this or that, but you've never actually tried. You've never actually done it. Maybe you shouldn't be speaking about the inevitability of something that is clearly politically motivated on your part. It's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Not if you want to be taken seriously. No. And making it through law school has nothing to do with being able to try a case either. Totally different.
So there's a certain amount of experience that comes with this. And at the same time, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not telling these guys their business, but I am saying that if you think that your legal argument is based on an article you wrote for National Review, no, I don't think so.
Right. Well, not difficult to believe that they would try that anyway. Well, best evidence in all of that is, what you gave us. The odds against reversing a conviction are enormous. I mean, it's there.
So start there. And especially when you have a really strong case. Those are the 2 points. And if you don't deal with those in your argument about why you don't like Maxine Waters, then you're not really going anywhere.
Right. Well, so much for that. So, all right, I guess they'll be doing that for a couple of days, and then there will be no mistrial, and then I don't know what else they'll do. They'll move on to something else, perhaps.
Speaking of moving on to something else, but sticking with the idea that you can't believe your own lying eyes.
Okay.
This is an interesting article, and I didn't think it was going to be interesting, but it actually turned out to be interesting. On Liz Cheney versus MAGA in the New York Times Magazine, I guess coming out this weekend. The Wyoming Congresswoman challenged Republicans to turn away from Trump after January 6th. Instead, they turned on her. And it's a discussion about the meeting that the conference had to decide whether or not she was going to stay in her leadership position after she voted to impeach Trump and didn't seem sorry about it.
Right. And great.
Right. So that Cheney was willing to face Trump's wrath, says the article, called attention to the fact that most of them were not. A factor in the agreement directed at Cheney in the meeting. Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania said Cheney had a low EQ, or emotional quotient.
Is that a thing?
No, but he made it one. On his way out the door, another congressman said, I just got to spend 4 hours listening to a bunch of men complain to a woman that she doesn't take their emotions into account.
Oh, well.
Right? But here's the interesting part.
Yes.
The conference voted to keep Liz in that position because we've got bigger fish to fry fighting the Democrats winning the next election, and this is a distraction from all of that. Jeff Duncan of South Carolina, who voted against Cheney, told the author of this piece. But he added, I think there's a huge disconnect with Liz and some others in the conference and the American people. She did have a conservative record, but then she became almost never Trumper, and I've been disappointed in her lack of humility.
Well,
it struck a lot of people as not only ode, but wow. You put those things together.
Yes.
Okay.
I will.
And the problem for Liz Cheney is that she embarrassed about a third of the conference because she was willing to say, this is how I think and this is what I think, and I'm saying it in public, and you guys are too cowardly to do it. I'm not. You think the same thing I do, but you're afraid to say it. I'm not. That's why I'm in leadership, and you're not.
Well, okay.
And they hated that. I mean, she didn't say that in so many words, but that's what her stance implied. And they hated it. Yeah, because they know they're too cowardly to say this in public. And they're really annoyed with her that, that she's highlighting that.
Well, too bad, I guess. I don't know. I mean, if you, with a name like Smucker, you have to be better than that, I guess.
I suppose.
It's not.
But it's so clear from the article that that's what happened. And so that's when, here's another one. Others argued her announcement a day before the impeachment vote had given the Democrats a talking point to use.
Okay.
Right? Because Nancy Pelosi said good for her for honoring her oath of office. Likening the situation to a football game, Mike Kelly of Pennsylvania lamented, you look up in the stands and see your girlfriend on the opposite side, and that's a hell of a tough thing to swallow. And a female colleague yelled, she's not your girlfriend.
Yeah, no,
Kelly's remark was immediately disseminated among Republican women in professional Washington, according to Barbara Comstock. We emailed that around, just horrified, commenting about it in real time.
That's pretty funny, and to think too. I'll give you a metaphor. It's from football. All right, fine, football. Right. Blah blah blah. Something my girlfriend.
Saying so in public was another matter, and that's why they were mad. Amazing.
Okay, right, sure, and that's pretty good. I didn't realize how wrong that metaphor was going to go, but I should have guessed. All right, we'll be back in 2 minutes for more lunacy. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Planet Earth and Earth Radio as well. Greg Dworkin's still with us. I'm still amazed at the content of that article and how many people were willing to talk to the press about saying that. I'm struck by Jeff Duncan's comment in particular that he was able to see and understand the logic of keeping Cheney in place in her position, but then said, not that I did that or anything. I thought that was interesting. I thought he would come out and say, well, I went into the meeting against her, but then I was convinced by the logic of saying, look, we have bigger fish to fry. And that part he said out loud, but then he said, but I don't, either I don't like fish or I don't care about frying them because I voted the other way. It's kind of interesting, too. Plus, of course, we learned of the existence of Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania. I wonder if he's related to the family.
I don't know.
Oh, I would look it up. But
it's I mentioned to David in the break, it also reminded me, of course, of the Republican stance toward Lisa Murkowski during the negotiations on the COVID relief bill. Because they were very proud of her, of course, that she represented her constituents and got the kind of bipartisan cooperation out of the Biden White House that they've been clamoring for. So she got an amendment added to the bill, and then, of course, every one of them voted against it, including Murkowski. But it's the same thing. Here's what I want. I'm telling you what I want. Okay, you can have it. Great. No. And, of course, we know that so well from the Affordable Care Act maneuvering a decade ago that we don't take it seriously. And to give you an idea of how we don't take it seriously, this is a piece in Politico yesterday. Senate Democrats reject Republican infrastructure bid. Democrats are rejecting a counteroffer to President Biden's $2.5 trillion infrastructure spending package before it's even introduced, basically because the Republicans don't really know what they're doing. They can't agree on what they want. And whatever they're offering is between 600 and 800 billion. It's way too small. Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut called it totally anemic. Mazie Hirono said no. And of all people, Joe Manchin wants more. Just saying it's a Republican bill, I never thought that. I never heard it. The group would still try to work together despite the possibility the GOP introduces its own proposal. So he's trying to work with a group of 20 lawmakers. The G10 or G20, I think the G is just a play on the G8 and it doesn't have
I think that's a stupid idea.
G doesn't really stand for anything other than goddamn, you guys are doing this again.
Gang of maybe, I don't know. G, instead of GO though, just G. Interesting. G. All right. Well, why not? Right.
So Manchin's trying to work with him and to get something that everybody can do, and the Republicans are going to offer their own bill, and Manchin is just throwing his hands up and saying, "This is not what I meant."
G. That's not working.
Right. So, there's that in the background. And of course, we're all happy about that because we know they're lying because they're the party of the big lie. All right. And we don't have to play along with that lie. Not necessary.
Okay. Then
right? Come to the table with something, show me the substance, show me the money, or otherwise, go home.
All right. Well, home it is.
Right. Meanwhile, this is University of Virginia, Center for Politics. Sabado's crystal ball. Checking in on Biden's approval rating as a 100-day mark nears by Kyle Kondik, and points out, and this is interesting because both this and the article I'm going to quote next from the Washington Post all refer to the 538 aggregate.
Okay.
I see that everywhere. And my point, I don't see Real Clear Politics anymore. Nobody's using that. Everybody's using 538. I'm really happy about that.
Okay. It's interesting.
Because the 538 aggregate is just more sensibly put together. The Real Clear Politics aggregate is, they put their thumb on the scale and everybody knows it. They don't include some polls. They include others. Okay. It's a very sloppy, let's do the last 5 polls that we like way of putting the aggregate together. And people are starting to abandon it in favor of the more rigorous 538 one. Not that that's perfect either, but it does its job in terms of being a poll aggregator.
Different product, and people have expressed a preference for this one.
Right. So Center for Politics says aggregation of national polls by 538, Biden at a 53 approval and 40 disapproval split is doing well compared to his predecessor, the former guy. They mention his name, but we don't have to. But he lags every other president in terms of net approval in the opening period of the presidency. What this table seems to illustrate is the hardening partisanship of the American electorate. Note the column on the right, the percentage of people expressing an opinion. The number has been over 90% at this point for the last 3 presidents. A sign that people who didn't vote for the new president are less likely to give a new president the benefit of the doubt, opting to just say disapprove, as opposed to saying they neither approve or disapprove.
Oh.
Right? So instead of saying, I don't know, is my team, your team.
I do know, and it's bad.
But at the same time, we're also in an era of steady presidential approval, which is another sign of hardening partisanship. Obama and Trump saw their average approval hover in a fairly narrow band. Obama was often in the mid to high 40s, and Trump was often in the low to mid 40s. And Gallup pegged Obama's average throughout his 8 years in office at 48. Trump's at 41. Jeff Skelly, former Crystal Ball colleague, now writing for 538, found in April 2020, Trump's approval rating was the steadiest of any of the post-war presidents, and Obama's was second.
Okay.
And it may be that in this era, presidents have both a hard ceiling and a hard floor in approval, so they only have a narrow band. And so you don't get landslides anymore, like you did with the late Walter Mondale, except in the other direction.
No. Okay, yes.
When he ran against that other guy.
The other former guy. Okay.
So I thought that was interesting. And then Aaron Blake, writing in the Washington Post, writes why the GOP is fretting about his inability to define Biden. We talked about this a little bit. in a previous show. Biden's undoubtedly benefiting from the contrast he set up with the chaotic presidency of Donald Trump, chaos agent. We talked about that. Simply by conducting himself in a relatively normal fashion. But that also could have a shelf life. All of that said, it's worth evaluating just how much Republicans have failed in their efforts to knock Biden down a peg and where he stands at this point in his presidency relative to others. So they also, of course, use the 538 average.
Hey.
But relative to other past presidents, Biden's numbers don't compare so favorably. But an even better comparison when it comes to how Biden is doing and the GOP's inability to define him might be perceptions of him on the key issues of the day. Many things color an overall approval rating, including polarization, personal feelings, but policy and performance not so much. And this might be an area in which the GOP hand-wringing is most warranted. Biden's actually doing better than his approval rating when it comes to things like the coronavirus, the COVID relief bill, his infrastructure and jobs package. His average approval rating on coronavirus is 62%. The relief package, again, it wasn't a stimulus, it was a relief package. Some surveys putting support for it as high as in the 70s. And early on, 64% for the infrastructure and jobs bill in one poll and 56% in another. And all of the key elements have majority support, with several at 60% or more in yet a different poll. Okay, so the one thing he's struggling with is the border, which is why Kevin McCarthy and the rest of the Republican Party are going all out on the bullhorn, not dog whistles, but bullhorns about economic anxiety.
I see. Well, okay. It's one thing you could do.
Right. So they compared to Bush and Clinton, who were pretty divisive presidents, but nothing like what we see these days. So the result's been much of what Biden is doing is actually more popular than he is, which is unusual at this juncture of our presidency, even if presidential popularity isn't. And as those perceptions of his signature legislation and handling of the biggest issue cement themselves in people's minds, it becomes more difficult to knock him down personally. And so, that allows us to do the presidential pivot into talking a little bit about the pandemic, because that's the biggest issue.
Okay. Do the presidential pivot. I like it. It's a new dance.
So this is the day that Biden finally became president, because I said so.
Oh, yeah. Why not? No one has been using that phrase. It seems he became president.
He became president on January 6th.
Oh, well, there's an argument for that.
Right, in many different ways.
Yeah.
But David Frum is writing an interesting thing here, which I don't agree with, but I think it was interesting.
Okay.
In 2016, Poor Health strongly predicted Trump voting.
I saw this.
A county's rate of diabetes, alcohol consumption, obesity, etc., predicted its propensity to vote Trump even better than race or education. I think of that grim relationship between Trump and sickness as I read the latest stories about how so many Republicans continue to refuse COVID vaccines. Mm-hmm. As D.K. Thompson points out, vaccine refusal is especially strong among younger Republicans. Thompson had a graph about this and said, my non-glib view is that middle-aged and young Republicans aren't getting the vaccines mostly because they don't believe COVID is serious. We know this from the data, and now they're backfilling their anti-Fauciism by hunting for evidence that the vaccines are freaky.
Okay.
Now, Frum says the self-harm of Trump voters should concern us all. They're fellow human beings, and because their self-harm also drives them to dangerous political extremes, their self-harm is also an important civic matter. But, he argues, there's an issue of personal responsibility here, too. Not in the sense, I would add, of blaming them for it. You could do that, but rather, who cares, let them go. A heroic scientific effort achieved at huge cost has delivered vaccines that are astonishingly effective at protecting life from COVID, so effective we may not need to worry about herd immunity. We'll talk about Germany and India in a minute. Okay. That's so. If the vaccines work as well as they seem to work, then vaccine refusal really does become a personal decision, like a motorcyclist refusing to wear a helmet. I think we ought to save people from self-harm, but there are practical limits to paternalism. So conservatives are always on this. They always get back to this. They don't like being told what to do. They go into this nanny state rant. He's no different. Trump and the Fox leadership have vaccinated themselves, of course, but they have a different message for their followers. They've persuaded them it's a test of identity and loyalty. We just talked about that with Liz Cheney. Which team are you on? Right?
Yeah. I can't say hers, but...
just as Sarah Palin once waged culture war against healthy eating, And as Senator Joni Ernst has done the same more recently, Joni Ernst in the left's war on meat, I'll stand up for Iowa farmers. I'm with the pigs.
War on meat. No, you're not, by the way. I see some comment from the pigs. I remember how you campaigned in your first Senate campaign.
You are not for the pigs.
Unbelievable. I'm for the pigs. Oh, my gosh.
What a hypocrite. So the gun issue, because those pigs, definite economic anxiety in that group. Mm-hmm. The gun issue is also one of self-harm and harm to loved ones. Almost 25,000 Americans a year use guns to end their lives. Thousands more horribly injured in gun accidents. It would never have happened without a firearm in the house. Yes, the people who voted Trump and watched Fox are victims of a slow-rolling national tragedy, but not only victims. They bear responsibility, too. So eventually, a free society reaches the limits of its ability to protect the ignorant and careless from the cells of what a society cannot do. It cannot have no duty to do. So he's saying at some point you cut him loose and say whatever. The problem with that is that it's not like wearing riding a motorcycle without a helmet, as Betsy Kasdan and some of the other people who are reading this have pointed out. It's more like smoking. And this is the argument, for those of you not old enough to remember, when restaurants began to start banning indoor smoking.
Yes.
Okay. Because secondary smoke damages people. It's not just you. And when you get the vaccine, you're protecting other people. It's not just you.
Okay.
And when you don't wear a motorcycle helmet, that's you.
Yes. Although
it's not the same. It's not the same analogy. It isn't the same as, government deciding what you. This is a case where government's looking after the bigger picture, where Spock was right and not Kirk. The many outweigh the needs of the one.
Well, that makes it makes some immediate sense in a way that the motorcycle helmet, I guess, doesn't to people. You have to look further afield to begin realizing, well, all our insurance costs go up, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, et cetera. And not only that, they start filling up the emergency rooms. And when they fill up the emergency rooms, then you, who didn't have anything to do with it or perhaps got vaccinated, can't get in for your cardiac arrest because there's you got sent to the next hospital down the road because this one's full. I mean, it has all sorts of ripple effects that go way beyond whether or not you wore a helmet in that particular motorcycle accident. So it's really a not a very good analogy. But it's, a lot of these analogies are just excuses to tell you what I thought anyway.
Yeah, so this one seems to be the case. Right?
And this one seems to be the case. State. So it is a big deal if people do or do not get their vaccines. And I don't think we can just, write off the public.
I don't think so either. It always amazes me about the resort to the nanny state thing. So I asked. I don't have an answer for it. Why do people keep getting nannies if we all hate the nanny state so much? And they seem to be pretty helpful. And
there is a bigger issue writ large here that I think we still have a lot of work to do in terms of explaining. I have my own theories, but you have all of these different states doing different things, and except for the occasional outlier like Michigan. For the most part, most of the states are all doing similarly, and that you could have a state like Texas, which does everything wrong but does okay. California is actually doing fantastic. So everybody says, well, what about California? Yes. They're the strictest, and look at them. Actually, they're doing fantastic.
They should be leading the charts every night. They just have far more people than any other state, and but
their numbers are really. If you take a look at California's numbers relative to other states like Michigan, they're really doing very well. But my theory is that we're sort of in equilibrium right now between the vaccines, which are getting out there and doing their job, and variants, with a little bit of opening up a little too soon thrown in on the side of the variants. But they're basically in equilibrium. And if you look at, these are 50 different epidemics, but if you put it all together to look at the United States, we're sort of flat, which is not where we want to be. But that's because those two things are in balance. So a little thing like opening up too early may or may not change that equilibrium. What generally changes the equilibrium is the activity of the state residents, which is independent of what the governor says. Here in Connecticut, we're opening up, but that doesn't mean people are going to eat out in restaurants without masks. If you're not comfortable doing that, you won't. And so it doesn't matter what the governor said. The governor isn't making you go eat indoors.
No,
he's saying you can if you want to. And what if you don't want to? He's not saying you don't have to wear a mask. He's saying you don't have to, at least outside. And soon you won't have to inside. And so what if you still want to? Then you will. So the behavior of the citizens is more important than what the governor says in any of these states. It's just that governors like to, claim they're leading and take responsibility for things that go well and blame other people for things that don't go well. That's the deal. That's the job. It's right there in the job description. Yes. So, when you hear people do this and then want to run for governor and then use that governor position to want to run for president, just so we know what's going on here. But there's still a lot unexplained. There's no unified field theory that says, okay, here's exactly why the pandemic is playing out the way it is right now. That's going to be a fascinating look when we try to, pull the threads on that tapestry and try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And I did see something like what you were explaining tweeted around the other day about us being sort of in an equilibrium between the advance of more contagious variants versus the effect of the vaccine. And they just seem to be canceling each other out at the moment and leaving us with a flat line of just a constant baseline of circulation of disease, which is not great. But it's not the spike that we've seen here in the past. We see now in India. German-speaking people, please forgive me. But the word that fits, I think, best is this neologism, this new word, one of 1,200 some odd pandemic words Germany came up with. And this one is Corona-Müde, which is coronavirus weariness. Oh, okay.
And German Lopez writes about this in Vox.
German Lopez?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
That's his name.
Definitely.
German Lopez writing about Germany.
Yeah, we're not living
Germany
in the Matrix.
contained COVID-19. Politics brought it back. Germany was returning to normal last summer. Then COVID-19 surged. And the question is why? Last summer, everybody was out doing everything. Today, Germany's streets are emptier. Few people trickle along the sidewalks. Many of the businesses Germans could visit last summer have closed down. The only thing I do with other people is work in the intensive care ward, treating patients sick with COVID. Petra Dickman, a doctor and researcher at Jena University Hospital, told me there's effectively no private life anymore. No. So in the span of a few months, Germany's gone from a shining example of a country that rallied the public behind a COVID-19 strategy to a cautionary tale about what can happen when that strategy falls apart. There's a variety of reasons why it fell apart. But one of this is this weariness of the whole pandemic situation, and also the Germany's federalist system, similar to the U.S. division between federal and state governments. So there was discord between the country's leaders. Angela Merkel could say shut down, and Bavaria could say, I don't think so. And act like Texas, and I don't even know if Bavaria did, but the point is they could. The federal system allows that. Yes. So all of this turned a nationwide response that was once marked by unity into one that was fragmented, dividing both the public and its leaders. Also, the leading coalition, the conservative coalition, was rocked by a major scandal. Was it? Because some of the political people were caught jacking up the price of masks and personal protective equipment to their own benefit in the middle of all of this. Sort of like Jared Kushner got caught, So that didn't help with, okay, you're the people telling us what to do, and you're putting money in your own pocket while you do it. That was bad. That's one of the reasons why the CDU had a relatively bad local election cycle recently. With the Greens doing very well.
Well, they did it right.
It was less pro-Green. It was anti-CDU, and that scandal was part of it. But that plays into the broader picture of how citizens look at the whole thing in terms of their government response. And that's one of the reasons why they're not united.
Well, they should work on that over there.
Right.
Okay.
So it being Germany. Yes. It wasn't, one of those places was Jena, a city of around 110,000 located in the southern part of former East Germany. It had a major university hospital that left it well positioned to confront the pandemic in March, the Jena University Hospital made a crucial decision. It required staff involved in patient care to wear masks, well before mask mandates became the norm outside of East Asia. It subsequently found that masks sharply decreased COVID-19 infections among healthcare workers. Hello, masks work.
Yes,
wasn't perfect evidence, but it was good enough during an emergency, and public health officials took it to Jena Mayor Thomas Nietzsche.
Really?
In a pandemic, you can't wait for the evidence. Sometimes you have to make pragmatic decisions. The mayor embraced the idea. He told me he knew he wanted to get ahead of it, so he and his team devised what was in the spring a solution untried in Germany before that, a mask mandate. His decision, announced March 30th, was not without risks. As in the U.S. and other parts of the world, there were concerns across Germany about shortages of protective equipment for healthcare workers, and some worried the public would reject the mask mandate as a violation of their freedoms.
Sounds familiar.
But this mayor knew the key to avoiding both these problems would likely come down to how the city's leaders told the public about the policy. Look at that, public health messaging. The government would need to transparently communicate the benefits of masks while acknowledging the downside. Yes, they can be uncomfortable. Masks could flatten the curve, save your family, get life back to normal. And to avoid a run on surgical masks, the local government would emphasize the value of cloth coverings and encourage people to make masks not just for themselves, but for others. And this took a lot of arguing and a lot of information campaigning. It's very important to do this together with the people and not on the people. They need to understand and accept. And the city took a week before the mandate went into effect. The local government blanketed public streets and walls with posters. City officials appeared on local and national media to explain the thinking. And the university hospital local economic engine made the population more receptive to public health action. And the national media took a deep interest in Jena's first-in-the-country experiment, giving the city campaign free publicity. And it seemed to work.
Is that where it all came from? I mean, I feel like we all did that eventually
that was the turning point, and then it spread across the Western democracies.
All because of Mayor Nietzsche. And did he at any point declare the pandemic to be an existential threat of any kind?
Yeah, and and he didn't seem to be terribly depressed about it either. So it was all good. Okay. So he began receiving calls from his peers who saw the results. How'd you do this? By the end of April, each of Germany's 16 states made masks compulsory. And by then, only 7 states in the U.S. had. And the nationwide adoption of mask mandates worked. The policies reduced the cumulative number of registered COVID-19 cases between 2.3 and 13% over a period of 10 days after they became compulsory. So it was fantastic. And so those were the good times, right? And then Germany became more fragmented. Then Oktoberfest came.
And they should have defragged.
Beer halls held their own celebrations.
Well.
And then they all came together maskless, and they had their own Sturgis, basically. And then Germany's COVID cases started to rise again.
What do you know? Right?
And then Merkel said, look, this is a difficult situation, and she tried to push more for stricter things, and the people weren't having it. They had enough.
That's incredible.
They had this corona.
They finally got
and they just didn't want to.
Good Germans to be actual good Germans, and then they just wouldn't. I'll tell you. All right.
Right. So by these state leaders are backed by vocal anti-lockdown segments, and the initial success against the virus, it also left more of the public cool on the need for harsher rules. And by the end of October, the scenario Merkel warned against early in the pandemic, when she explained exponential spread, started to happen. And then even at that point, the country's governments by November only agreed to what they called a lockdown light. Bars, restaurants, and several other indoor spaces, the way we did.
Beer metaphor. Okay.
Right?
Right.
And it's a federalist problem. Fabian Hartke, a public policy expert at the University of Hamburg, told me, until later in the fall, the heads of states didn't agree on common measures, and some went strict and some went loose. Okay. And so, again, he brings up that Corona movie also playing a role. People are more or less fed up. They're tired. They're not adherent. Then, of course, there was the power vacuum as Merkel stepped down. In Germany, the current political era is sometimes called Merkel-Dämmerung. The twilight of Merkel.
Okay, I guess.
After more than a decade and a half as chancellor and nearly 2 decades as leader of the center-right Christian Democratic Union, she said in her retirement, announcement, it was time for the country and the party to start a new chapter. And so they decided to, and one of the ways they did is stopping to listen.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty amazing. All right.
Then her parent successor, Armin Laschet, who's been recently elected to head the party, criticized the lockdown. I don't think I even
registered this.
And criticizing Angela Merkel for treating voters like underage children. So now you had the people who's probably going to lead the country, criticizing the strictness of it all. And so the whole thing fell apart.
Well, this does sound familiar, except I don't, it occurs to me that I really haven't
our own
registered
experience,
Merkel's
you could see it. I mean, look at what happened with Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan.
Right.
You had the Republican legislature essentially strip her of public health powers.
Yeah, I guess, right. Well, it is pretty familiar, and I don't know. I guess the problem with it is that this virus takes its time in exacting its revenge, and people just like say, I went out with a mask like 15 minutes ago and I'm not dead yet. So there's no such thing.
The virus basically doesn't care whether or not you think Derek Chauvin is going to get a retrial.
Well, that's true. It does what it does, and it takes
does
a while.
What it does.
We've known
it's
that
got
for
nothing
so
to do with
long,
politics in terms of what it does. It has everything to do with politics in terms of how we respond to it. Yeah. So that's the German experience. Again, probably the state that comes to mind most closely, and there's no direct parallels for all the different reasons we talked about. And particularly our vaccine campaign. But Michigan comes to mind in terms of the closest state parallel to what's going on in Germany. And one that we fortunately don't have, and unfortunately for them they do have, is the problem in India.
Yes.
They have, 300,000 new infections a day.
Yes.
They have people lined up in the hospitals with relatives, bringing their relatives in gurneys, begging the doctors to at least give me a minute to look at what's going on here. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So keep an eye on that as the break comes up. I'll be back on Monday and try to sum up some new stuff. But, this pandemic isn't over yet.
No, even in Germany.
Not worldwide.
True. All right. Well, we'll keep an eye on that as well as we've been doing. Time to share some of those vaccines, I guess. Thanks, Greg. See you Monday. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Very interesting examples from Germany, and of course, very interesting words that they're inventing and names of the people involved in all these things. Thanks to Mayor Nietzsche. And I was struck by the public policy expert from the University of Hamburg, Fabian. It sounded like he said his name was Fabian Hotgay, and I was like, Hotgay. All right, awesome. What a great inclusion for our morning discussion. Okay, but Hattke, which I don't know, is that how you would pronounce that in German? We neither of us speak German. Many of you do, and you can tell us how we might have done better on all of that. But it's a big meme in the internet world and elsewhere, the real world, the rest of Earth here on Earth Day, to poke fun at the way the Germans make their compound words and how they have a word for everything. But it's fun and interesting and revealing of their ordered thinking, even though it didn't do them any good in avoiding the pandemic any more than it did us. People are the same everywhere, I guess, and we refuse to learn anything from those who are most like us and share their information. All right, let's see. Rounding up other bits and pieces of the news. First of all, I guess I should correct things. I think I saw someone tweeting this earlier and I didn't capture it, and I got the spirit of the tweet wrong, and that has resulted in a mistake in attribution. The climate activists who were dumping wheelbarrows full of cow manure outside of the White House to protest Joe Biden's so-called BS climate plan are not not there today anyway, representing the Sunrise Movement, who get enough flack as it is. But these folks were from Extinction Rebellion, which is apparently, according to the person who's tweeting all of this for the DC Examiner, it's Nick Rowan. DC Examiner, not really the the source I'd go to for balanced and accurate information about climate activists, for one thing. But pointing out that they are from Extinction Rebellion, probably true, right? And he labels them as a group that often does stunt protests, and lots of people do. So they're doing it too. It's not the Sunrise Movement. There may be commonalities. There may be dual memberships. Who knows? But it's not them doing it in the name of the Sunrise Movement anyway. So we should at least be clear about that. There's plenty that you could criticize either group for, I'm sure, and not resort to not have to resort to getting it wrong or mislabeling them. It's an interesting protest in the sense that it's a pretty ripe target, and it's not a joke about the cow manure that they're using, but they made their march over there with wheelbarrows full of manure, and they are pink wheelbarrows with the word love written on the side, and they appear to have been perhaps procured precisely for this purpose. Oh, I guess they have all sorts of things written on the sides. The one I can see most clearly says love, but they have various other slogans on them. And people, I guess, fair game, right? Pointing out, I don't know, maybe, procuring 100 plastic wheelbarrows for the purpose of this stunt might not have been necessarily all that pro-environment either. And what are we going to do with the big pile of cow manure that's out in the street? And now that has to be cleaned up, and are they going to do anything with it? But I don't know. Anyway, the point's been made, and then later on after that, the point was made incorrectly by me, thinking it was the Sunrise Movement when it wasn't. And now they would know to get organic, artisan, handcrafted wheelbarrows made by indigenous peoples, probably, in order to pull this stunt off. They're very conscious of these things, and it pays to credit them for that. Okay, let's see. Other items up for consideration. I mentioned in passing to Greg that there was the report in the Hill. This we'll give proper credit for. Rebecca Beitsch, I guess, Beitschch. I suppose you'd have to be careful how you endeavor to pronounce that one. GOP lawmaker demands review over FBI saying baseball shooting was suicide by cop. I'm just sort of interested in by what mechanics might they ask for such a review or get such a review. And we'll lay the blame on somebody here. An Ohio lawmaker is seeking a review of the FBI's investigation into the 2017 shooting of Republican lawmakers as they practiced for a congressional baseball game, according to the Bureau, arguing that the Bureau erred in its conclusion that the shooter sought suicide by cop. The call comes from Representative Brad Wenstrup, again, a Republican of Ohio, new name for me, one of the lawmakers on the field in June 2017 when a shooter opened fire on the practice, shooting 4 people and seriously wounding House Whip Steve Scalise, or Scalise. I've never really settled on what's the correct pronunciation there, but I'll go with Greg's pronunciation on that one. He's probably seen him on TV more than I have. The FBI briefed lawmakers a few months after the incident that shooter who supported, I guess they're missing a word here, the shooter who supported left-wing causes on social media and inquired about the political affiliation of those on the field was largely carried out as a suicide attempt, but their conclusion was never made public. And that's sort of interesting, too. Like, I don't know what the big complaint is. If the conclusion was never made public, then you can still have your narrative, and you might as well. But, okay, they want the FBI's imprimatur on this thing so they can point to that and say, you don't have to take our word for it. Believe the FBI. But the FBI doesn't believe that, so they want to force them to believe that. In a letter dated last week but released to reporters Wednesday, Wenstrup criticized the FBI's conclusion. This conclusion, he says, defies logic. It defies some logic, but not the total weight of logic. Okay, you'll see in a minute. This conclusion defies logic and contradicts the publicly known facts about the perpetrator and the attack. The shooter had an extensive social media record highlighting his hatred of President Trump and Republicans, Wenstrup wrote. He was heavily armed, sought cover during the shooting. Well over 100 rounds were fired, and the attacker could not have known that then Majority Whip Steve Scalise's security detail was present, given that they were in an undercover vehicle and in plain clothes. All these facts are inconsistent with a designation of suicide by cop, he wrote. And I guess we're jailhouse lawyering a little bit here. Not a terrible job of it. I mean, it may be that Wenstrup is a lawyer, but just for the sake of parsing this story, because that's what we do. Otherwise, I could just tell you to go read it. He's not wrong that all of these things are evidence that one could argue tends to lead to the conclusion that perhaps suicide by cop isn't as definitive a conclusion as the FBI might paint it to be. But none of them are conclusive. They are not by themselves or even in combination proof that their conclusion is wrong. But that's what you would argue if you wanted to criticize the conclusion. So I don't know that it defies logic, or it doesn't defy the weight of all logic. It defies some small amount of logic that could be applied to these individual and publicly known facts. Does it contradict it to say that the shooter had extensive social media record highlighting his hatred of President Trump and Republicans? No. Not really. First of all, they didn't say it was extensive. They said that he did have a social media presence that made that plain. But unless we're going to reach the conclusion that anybody who had a social media record highlighting hatred of President Trump and Republicans is somehow also, they definitely don't want to commit suicide, much less suicide by cop. Well, I don't know where you would draw such a conclusion. It's not that somebody couldn't want to commit suicide by cop and hate President Trump and Republicans. I'll bet that happens a lot. Then, of course, I guess some of the other arguments are a little bit better. He was heavily armed, that's true. But then, again, if you're out for suicide by cop, that's kind of how you'd do it. Because if you go out there with a slingshot, in the logical world, they're less likely to shoot you. I mean, unless you're black, in which case they'll shoot you. The less armed you are, the more likely they'll shoot you, I guess. But now, if you're trying to get the cops to shoot at you, I don't see why being heavily armed is inconsistent with that. It's, I guess, a little bit inconsistent to say, well, he sought cover during the shooting. Maybe, if you wanted to be killed by cops during the shooting, I suppose you would do your shooting from out in the open. Of course, as you pointed out, this is interesting too. The attacker couldn't have known that the security detail was present, given that they were undercover and in plain clothes. But remember, he's looking for cops to arrive on the scene. I mean, somebody who goes in with a manifesto that says, I am here for suicide by cop, they don't usually, I don't know, maybe they do. I don't think it's always the case. They don't show up at a precinct house somewhere and start shooting that. They perpetrate whatever spectacular crime they have in mind in anticipation of the police arriving and then killing them. So the fact that there were plainclothes officers nearby, I don't think necessarily argues either way. But I suppose if you had told them that they were present, that would be all the better, unless he wanted to be shot by a cop in uniform, if that was part of his plan. I don't know. I'm not saying that it's a conclusion I support necessarily either. It could have been suicide by cop, could have been politically motivated. I understand why, what's his name, Wenstrup wants that narrative, but I'd say his logic isn't all that sterling, quite honestly. So there's nothing about being heavily armed or seeking cover during the shooting, and of course that's his shooting. After the shooting, when the police were shooting, was he seeking cover or was he out in the open? That's the important part. Also, the part about well over 100 rounds being fired. Again, if you want to make it plain to the police that they are going to have to shoot you to finish this incident, That's a fine way of demonstrating the point. And 100 rounds fired, and what did he hit 4 targets? So, not a great shooter either. Or not somebody with necessarily the strongest motivation to actually hit targets. In fact, I guess you could say, as long as we're doing some zealous advocacy from both sides, I'd say, well, the fact that he fired 100 rounds and only hit 4 people actually argues in favor of suicide by cop. He was there chiefly to provoke police into having to kill him in order to bring the incident to a close, and not chiefly to wound or kill his alleged targets. So, I don't know what to tell you. But it doesn't really matter. It hangs together logically enough for him to demand that something be reviewed. Like I said, I'll trade you for a review of how the FBI handled the revisited background check on Kavanaugh. Not that you're entitled to give that away or obligated in any way to give us equal time in this, but just thought I'd throw that one out there. We all have questions about how the FBI reviews things. All right, let's see. The letter, which was first reported by Politico, asked the FBI's Counterterrorism Division to review the findings. Interesting. Wenstrup also said the FBI never formally interviewed any lawmakers as witnesses, which is what made me actually think, well, I don't know that they'd have anything to add to it, but that's what reminded me about the Kavanaugh thing. They never actually interviewed any of the additional people who were levying accusations against Kavanaugh, but they were pretty sure they did a thorough investigation. Maybe the criticism weighs against both investigations after all. And of course, it gives away the conclusion for Wenstrup to say that he wants the Counterterrorism Division to review the findings. That is to say, he needs there to be a finding that this was a terrorist activity so that they don't have to give up the one example that they've had when people say, you keep saying that the left are really the dangerous terrorists. Give me an example of something that they do versus the constant barrage of right-wing terrorism we're subjected to. Well, remember the school, the baseball practice shooting? Yeah. The suicide by cop one, you mean? Yeah, so that puts a big crimp in their argument. Anyway, the FBI didn't respond to any requests for comment about this. The other Republicans present on the field that day shared Wenstrup's frustration with the FBI's conclusion. We were furious about it. This was from Representative Barry Loudermilk of Georgia, but it went nowhere. The guy had an assassination list in his pocket. He asked Representative Jeff Duncan, there's the second appearance for Jeff Duncan today, beforehand, are these Democrats or Republicans? He was a radicalized Bernie Sanders supporter. He said, Loudermilk went on to describe shooter James Hodgkinson, I should not be naming the shooters at this point, as pivoting between firing at lawmakers and the Capitol police officers who were drawing fire away from them. That's not what somebody does when they just want to die, Loudermilk said. Unless, of course, you're trying your best to provoke the police officers to shoot at you and to take you out this way. Wenstrup asked about the FBI's determination in a little-noticed exchange with Director Christopher Wray last week during a House Intelligence Committee hearing. Wray responded that he had not been FBI director at the time of the horrific attack at that baseball field on that day. So, lots of, sympathetic words from the FBI director on that. Wray did not, however, commit to reviewing the conclusion. I have been committed since I started the job to making sure that the FBI does the right thing in the right way, generally speaking, I guess, and I've tried to instill that message in everything we do in this gang. So I can see why they'd be frustrated about that, because it's not a particularly helpful answer, but it may be that in the end, there's nothing they can do to help sustain their preferred narrative after all. But I'd be interested to see it myself. Okay, I don't think it'll make a tremendous difference one way or the other, but just keeping tabs on their effort to maintain their narrative. I just thought that would be worth doing in case we see things reverse any point in the near future. All right, let's see. Yesterday, we spent some time discussing how the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General ducked responsibility for an investigation into two particular problems that the Secret Service was facing. One, questions about what their role was in clearing Lafayette Square, or Lafayette Park, as I guess they call it now, during the initial protests over George Floyd's murder last year, and the question of the spread of coronavirus among the Secret Service agents who were, a little too active in helping Donald Trump gallivant about the country during the early days of the pandemic. Now, there's another similar story, and I imagine that there are a dozen or more similar stories out there of inspectors general and other watchdogs ducking the responsibility to undertake a real investigation of a lot of things that the Trump administration was accused of doing wrong. Here's another one, and this one, no surprise. Investigation suppressed by Trump administration reveals obstacles to hurricane aid for Puerto Rico. A watchdog report uncovers bureaucratic hurdles the administration erected for the island to receive aid after hurricanes Irma and Maria. Tracy Jan and Lisa Rain combined for this report. The Trump administration put up bureaucratic obstacles that stalled approximately $20 billion in hurricane relief for Puerto Rico, and then obstructed an investigation into the holdup, according to an Inspector General report obtained by the Washington Post. What do you know? Congress requested the investigation into the delays to recovery aid for Puerto Rico after Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017 left residents of the U.S. territory without power and clean water for months, and in some places still. But, the report said, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson and another former HUD official declined to be interviewed by investigators during the course of the examination that began in 2019. Access to HUD information was delayed or denied on several occasions. Several former administration officials in the Office of Management and Budget refused to provide requested information about decision-making related to the Puerto Rico relief funds. I wonder if the other HUD official will turn out to be that one woman whose name we always call, who was the Region 2 director. Region 2 in the New York area might actually include Puerto Rico. They might sometimes throw them into similar, they throw them in with some mainland region, and very often it's New York. I wonder if that's the case, and if so, that would be, what's her name? Lynn, I can't recall her last name. Well, we'll see if she comes up in here, but she was the one that was the wedding planner for the Trump boys somewhere along the line, and they just made her a HUD official for no real reason. Delays and denials of access and refusals to cooperate negatively affected the ability of the Office of the Inspector General to conduct this review, this report said. The 46-page report presents an incomplete picture of the political influence of the Trump White House on delaying disaster relief for the struggling island. Still, Inspector General Ray Oliver Davis, appointed by Trump as top HUD watchdog, found unprecedented procedural hurdles set by the White House Budget Office, in addition to an extended partial federal government shutdown that also produced delays. The OMB required HUD's notice of grant funds to go through an interagency review process before approval, preventing HUD from publishing its draft notice of funding by its target date. Now, the OMB had never before required such a review process for a notice allocating disaster recovery funds, according to the Inspector General's report, and there had been no previous discussion about requiring the extra step. They just threw it in there for the hell of it. One senior HUD official, Stan Gimont, it's Gimont, then the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Grant Programs, bemoaned the tedious review process imposed by the White House Budget Office as kind of like Groundhog Day. Just keeps coming back. And that's where your frustration will set in. It's almost like we're going to keep bringing this back to you until you just eat it, the report said. While investigators interviewed 20 current and former HUD officials and 2 Puerto Rico housing officials, they had no access to Carson. Several senior political appointees at HUD withheld answers to questions, and White House Budget Office officials involved in delaying the timing of the aid also refused to cooperate. No surprise there. The report said Carson and then HUD Deputy Secretary Brian Montgomery, is that a name we've heard before, had expressed mounting concerns and frustrations to then acting OMB Director Russell Vogt, we've heard his name, about HUD's inability to make progress on dispersing the funds. At one point, Montgomery told Vogt that the White House's actions were tantamount to holding disaster relief funds hostage, the report said. And that's pretty much what they were accused of right then and there. But the Inspector General said, given the lack of cooperation, investigators were unable to determine why the extra layer of review was required. What a surprise. HUD had initially intended to publish a funding notice that would have applied to all 16 jurisdictions receiving hurricane relief, but OMB urged the agency to issue separate notices for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, the report said. Carson reluctantly agreed on the grounds that the agency was concerned over alleged corruption and fiscal mismanagement on the island. Why was he so reluctant, I wonder? The Post had previously reported that President Donald Trump repeatedly told aides that disaster relief allocated for Puerto Rico must be closely monitored because he believed the territory's government is corrupt and the economy was in poor shape before the hurricanes devastated the island. Not that that should matter. But Trump had also told then White House Chief of Staff John Kelly and then OMB Director Mick Mulvaney that he did not want a single dollar going to Puerto Rico. And instead, he wanted more of the money to go to Texas and Florida. Well, okay, open and shut, right? The White House Budget Office also insisted on overhauls to Puerto Rico's property management records, suspension of its minimum wage on federal contracts, and other prerequisites to access relief funds, prompting Montgomery to question whether HUD had the legal authority to enforce such requirements, the report said. How many poison pills are in here? Montgomery wrote in an email to other senior HUD officials, according to the report. Montgomery said he did not believe that HUD could coerce Puerto Rico to fix its property tax system to receive mitigation funding because the property tax system was not related to mitigation activities, the report said. He also indicated that HUD did not put these types of conditions on other disaster recovery grantees. The report, expected to be released publicly as early as Thursday, I guess that's today, Earth Day. They're on Earth. They're entitled to this report. Anyway, the report comes 5 months after Trump's re-election defeat. I guess that's what it takes to get at the truth. It is one of numerous politically sensitive investigations by federal watchdogs who are mandated by Congress to monitor agencies for waste, fraud, and misconduct that was impeded by the last administration. Damaging disclosures about former Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, former White House physician Ronnie Jackson, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and other Trump officials were made public months after they left office. At least a dozen other investigations have yet to be completed, in part because of unprecedented delays to inquiries by inspectors general. Other overdue reports include an inquiry by the Commerce Department watchdog into the administration's controversial decision to add a question on citizenship to the U.S. Census, 2 long-running ethics probes of Ryan Zinke, Trump's first Interior Secretary, and an audit of a $400 million contract to build the border wall that was awarded at Trump's urging to a North Dakota construction firm whose top executive was a prominent GOP donor. Davis took the unusual step of laying out the administration's obstruction at the top of the HUD report. The report also notes that Trump administration officials delayed investigators' access to emails and other electronic documents. Another nasty practice widespread in this administration, invoking the claim of privilege by the president, known as executive privilege, of withholding information in the public interest. HUD demanded that agency attorneys sit on investigators' interviews with Carson and other political appointees, the report said, a tactic widely used during the Trump administration that watchdogs worried could unduly shape testimony. And I guess it did. All right, well, there's a little bit more to this one. Maybe we'll continue it on the other side. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Radio. Let's finish up this article because there's only a little bit more here. I had read out to you before the break that HUD had demanded that agency attorneys sit in on investigators, and I think I said sit on investigators' interviews, but not to suppress the interviews, but to sit in on those investigators' interviews with Carson and other political appointees. The report said that that was the tactic that was widely used during the Trump administration that watchdogs worried could unduly shape testimony. Davis had previously expressed concern to congressional staffers about HUD's attorneys' desire to be present for witness testimonies. While Carson was never interviewed, other former political appointees eventually agreed to be interviewed without an agency lawyer, but then refused to answer certain questions, the report said. So the lawyers weren't really necessary. They were there as political minders, but some of these people were their own political minders and just refused to answer the questions. All right. We figured they were going to do such a thing. HUD did not immediately respond to a request for comment about the IG's findings. The Biden administration this week removed what it called onerous restrictions unique to Puerto Rico that limited the island's access to disaster recovery funds and announced the obligation of $8.2 billion in federal mitigation funds. Among the eliminated restrictions are the incremental grant obligations and review by a federal financial monitor to oversee the aid, as well as additional oversight by the U.S. territory's federally mandated Fiscal Control Board beyond what is already required by law, HUD said in its announcement. Since its first days, the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized action to enable stronger recovery for Puerto Rico, said HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge in a statement, adding that the new administration's actions would unlock access to funds Puerto Rico needs to recover from past disasters and build resilience to future storms while ensuring transparency and accountability. Well, we hope so. All the right things said there anyway. But just another example of the proper operation of the IG offices being impeded by the Trump administration. No surprise, obviously, to anyone, and just one among dozens of similarly obstructed investigations, some of which he was actually impeached for at some point, and others of which he continues, even from out of office, through his allies in Congress, to impede, i.e., the investigation into the January 6th insurrection, which I did happen to see this morning, also on the Twitter news machine, someone commenting that I guess Speaker Pelosi is still seeking some sort of agreement with members of, or Republican members of Congress over putting together a bipartisan commission here. Jake Sherman trumpeting his Punchbowl News AM report that Pelosi is giving Republicans another concession in her quest to get a January 6th commission, That being that subpoenas can be issued by the chair and or the vice chair or by a committee vote, which means that all subpoenas would be bipartisan. There's a thread continuing on this. What else does he have to say about this? This is Pelosi's second concession here. She said she would do an even Republican-Democrat split on the commission. Pelosi is clearly trying to smoke Republicans out here. She wants them defending their request to expand the scope of the probe beyond January 6th. That according to his tweeted summary of the article attached, I am sure, and leads us back to the question of that Greg had posed the other day. Why aren't we just doing this by executive order? Although one possible answer, I don't recall from our reading about the Kerner Commission. Did the Kerner Commission, did we get a definitive, was there a discussion of whether or not they had enforceable subpoena power, the commission? Their study might not necessarily have required subpoena power. And of course, back in the 60s, you probably had to subpoena fewer people just to get them to testify on such an important question. Everybody probably considered it their duty and their interest to do so. And now that's not the case. So I suppose it's possible. I don't know. I'm just spitballing whether it's possible that perhaps a congressionally chartered commission would have subpoena power. I mean, they clearly, in this outline of their view of how, or Pelosi's vision of how the commission would operate, they have subpoena power. And I don't know why you couldn't, by executive order, necessarily grant the executive branch obviously has its own subpoena powers. Why not grant those powers to the commission? But perhaps there's some limitation, or perhaps the Kerner model isn't the best one if they didn't have subpoena power. I can go back and look that up, but that's the only difference I can see, or the only answer I can think of to throw out, in terms of leading to, maybe there's an answer as to why we're not doing this by executive order that isn't simply political, which, could certainly be the consideration here too, that the Biden administration doesn't want to be the one to create the commission for whatever reason. But, and you might want to give Congress the first crack at it. It was, after all, the Capitol that was stormed in all of this. But look, if the job can't get done, I don't see why you wouldn't do it by executive order. We really ought to have that investigation. All right, let's see. Other subjects, there are many. Speaking of the Capitol insurrection, maybe we could sneak this one in before we get to some of the other top stories waiting to go. Saw a lot of people on my Twitter feed complaining about this one or suggesting that we look into it as well. Politico reporting yesterday, I think so, yes, that Zoe Lofgren had made some comments about one of the investigations into January 6th ongoing in one of the standing committees that raised a lot of eyebrows. Lofgren, the headline reads, Capitol Police official being investigated for directions to pursue only anti-Trump protesters on January 6th. And they probably had a hard time finding them, which might explain why there weren't more arrests made. An investigation found an official's radio transmission to all outside units' attention that they should not be looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd for some reason. According to Lofgren, a Capitol Police official denies her account. I should be interested to find out about this. A Capitol Police official radioed units outside of the building on the morning of January 6th and told them only to scout for anti-Trump troublemakers, not pro-Trump protesters. And there's a bird outside the window that's strongly protesting the reading of this story as well. I don't know if that's coming through on the microphone or not, but I can hear it. Anyway, or I'm imagining it. That could be. Okay, so what's up with this? So this came according to Zoe Lofgren, who described what she said were details of an internal investigation conducted in the aftermath of the mob attack. Lofgren revealed the finding when she questioned Capitol Police Inspector General, another Inspector General, Michael Bolton. How many Michael Boltons we got circulating in the government these days? Anyway, he appeared before the House Administration Committee on Wednesday, yesterday, to testify about security failures that precipitated the January 6th attack. Lofgren, who chairs the panel, described the findings as she asked him whether he had read the internal investigation reports. Lofgren said the department's Office of Professional Responsibility was reviewing information that a radio transmission to all outside units' attention that they should not be, quote, looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd, according to Lofgren. She added they were only looking for any anti-Trump. Bolton said he had yet to review the reports of internal investigations into the conduct of about 36 officers on January 6th, many of which are ongoing in the department's Office of Professional Responsibility, or OPR. A committee aide declined to disclose additional details from the investigation, but emphasized that Lofgren's panel is recently in receipt of new documents and emails related to the insurrection, including materials which brought to light these issues the chair asked the Inspector General about today. The committee is continuing to review those documents and emails and intends to review the relevant recorded audio when it is available. A Capitol Police official told Politico that the radio communication Lofgren described involved a Capitol Police command official who told officers simply to be on the lookout for counter-protesters because that is often where we have clashes between both sides. This is not and was never under investigation by OPR, the official said, adding that the radio message was delivered at 8 a.m., well before there were any issues with anybody in the Capitol. And that seems plausible. I mean, another way of putting the order, of course, would be, well, keep a lookout for where there might be fights breaking out, because we understand that the group we expect to show up here later will be pro-Trump, but they may be countered by anti-Trump protesters, and very often the trouble breaks out where they meet. That might have been a clearer instruction. But, I could buy the idea that at 8 a.m. they didn't really know what they were facing. Although the details are still disputed, Lofgren's comments are the first insight into specific concerns about the conduct of Capitol Police on the day of the insurrection. Neither Lofgren nor the department identified the official. The Capitol Police have acknowledged ongoing investigations, including the fact that 6 officers were suspended for their particular actions, but have provided no updates since they began months ago. Many Democratic lawmakers expressed alarm after the January 6th assault on the Capitol by a pro-Trump mob that some of the Capitol Police officers appeared to either wave the crowd through or pose for selfies with them. The reality has been more complex. About 138 Capitol Police and D.C. officers were assaulted on January 6th, some receiving severe injuries. 1 died hours later of apparent strokes, and 2 took their own lives in the days and weeks after the attack. Footage from the riot shows at times savage hand-to-hand combat in which outnumbered police were attacked and beaten, pepper sprayed and bludgeoned with poles, batons, and even a hockey stick and a skateboard. Inside the building, rioters often confronted police, and in other cases, police were reduced to bystanders as the crowd patrolled Capitol hallways. Outside the House and Senate chambers, however, it was a different story, as police beat back fierce crowds attempting to breach the rooms where lawmakers were being evacuated. All right, very interesting as I was reading this last couple of paragraphs here. Especially I was struck, just again, reminded by the 2 Capitol Police officers who committed suicide shortly after the attack. And I wonder, it's always a waste and a difficult thing to accept when somebody does this. But I was wondering, would it have made any difference if they had held on just a little bit longer? It's a sad thing, and I don't know if it would have improved their outlook on life at all, but it might have changed their decision to commit suicide if they had held on just a little bit longer. In order to, my guess is that they committed suicide because they took their job very seriously and they felt that they had failed to protect members of Congress and the integrity of the institution. And I guess I'm kind of wondering whether they might have made a different decision if they were made aware of, well, they might have committed suicide for very different reasons. The sad state of affairs that Republicans, who constitute, through various unfair mechanisms, gerrymandering, and the imbalance in the Senate, are 50% of the Congress. 50% of the Congress, in hindsight, doesn't care about the insurrection and never cared about the necessity of protecting the integrity of the place. And maybe these cops didn't need to feel quite so bad, given that half the Congress appeared to invite the insurrection. Or maybe they could say it was we never had any hope of repelling an attack invited by half the institution. I wonder whether that might have changed the outcome for them. But, maybe not. I mean, mental illness and depression is what it is. And, there's no way from the outside, because I read a Politico news article, that I'm going to have any insight into what motivated these suicides. It's a thought. That's all. All right. There are other very important stories that we need to give some time to. And at least one of you, and I'm trying to think if I can scroll back and find the suggestion, and I know it was made, and it might have come without the KITM hashtag. Nope, there it is. Patrick Snyder suggesting this story, although with a little bit of fresh language, Patrick. I'm surprised. Not really, of course. But, the Trump Republican rat F of America continues. That's the spicy, salty stuff. He's suggesting that we take a look at this piece I had spotted earlier, and we cast the same jaundiced eye on this piece from Yahoo News. This seems important as an inclusion. The Postal Service, it is said, still headed by Louis DeJoy, by the way, despite the many calls for his firing. The board of directors of the Postal Service don't seem interested in responding on that front. Yahoo News reports that the Postal Service is running a covert operations program that monitors Americans' social media posts. This in Yahoo News by Jana Winter, Jana. Could be Jana. We don't know whether she goes with an Americanized pronunciation. But this is a bit surprising. One, that the Postal Service would run a covert operations program of any kind. And two, that they would do it in pursuit of monitoring social media posts, which are by no means the concern of the Postal Service. They're not in the postal system. I guess you could complain that they are competitors to the postal system, but that wouldn't really give them... I just don't see where they have jurisdiction, but what the hell? Who cares about laws? The law enforcement arm of the U.S. Postal Service, I guess that's postal inspectors, right? Has been quietly, because it's probably illegal, running a program that tracks and collects Americans' social media posts, including those about planned protests, according to a document obtained by Yahoo News. The details of the surveillance effort, known, again, as part of the Matrix glitch universe here, as ICOP, or Internet Covert Operations Program. And by the way, if you're naming your Covert Operations Program and you want it to remain covert and people not to take a look at it, probably don't name it Covert Operations Program. But what do I know? I mean, maybe that's good. Transparency, honesty in government. Well, anyway, the details have not been previously made public because it was covert. It was right in the name. The work involves having analysts, it's not even just algorithms doing this, analysts trawl through social media sites to look for what the document describes as inflammatory postings and then sharing that information across government agencies. So the interest is perhaps among many agencies that might arguably have jurisdiction. Why the manpower is coming from, the person power, pardon me, yes, is coming from the Postal Service, which, we keep having this argument, isn't even really governmental in the strictest sense. I have no idea, except that maybe they thought no one would look. And by the way, can I have a paying job looking through social media sites for inflammatory postings? I would do that work. Analysts with the United States Postal Inspection Service Internet Covert Operations Program. What a dumb thing. Well, these agents or analysts monitored significant activity regarding planned protests occurring internationally, really, and domestically on March 20th, 2021. So I guess this hasn't been an ongoing thing. They were specifically looking for information about protests planned for March 20th. This, according to the March 16th government bulletin, marked as law enforcement sensitive and distributed through the Department of Homeland Security's fusion centers. Well, that goes a long way towards explaining how this weird relationship exists. Locations and times have been identified for these protests, which are being distributed online across multiple social media platforms to include right-wing leaning Parler and Telegram accounts. Was Parler even in operation on March 20th? So I guess we could be interested in the fact that they're looking apparently for right-wing activity. But what a weird situation. But also vindicating those of you who have been concerned about fusion centers for quite a while. A number of groups were expected to gather in cities around the globe on March 20th as part of a worldwide rally for freedom and democracy. Okay. To protest everything from lockdown measures to 5G, because those are the real concerns with respect to freedom and democracy in the world. Parler users have commented about their intent to use the rallies to engage in violence. That fell flat, thankfully, but as most right-wing plans do, thankfully as well. Image 3 on the right, this is a quote from the report here, so I don't see the image. But image 3 on the right is a screenshot from Parler indicating two users discussing the event as an opportunity to engage in a fight and, quote, do serious damage, says the bulletin. No intelligence is available to suggest the legitimacy of these threats, it adds. The bulletin includes screenshots of posts about the protests from Facebook, Parler, Telegram, and other social media sites. Individuals mentioned by name include one alleged Proud Boy and several others whose identifying details were included, but whose posts did not appear to contain anything threatening. ICOP analysts are currently monitoring these social media channels for any potential threats stemming from the scheduled protests and will disseminate intelligence updates as needed, the bulletin says. And there is a embedded Scribd document captured from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service web resources, I guess, on this. And there's plenty to it, but I can't scroll through all of it now, and it's too small to read anyway. The government's monitoring of American social media is the subject of ongoing debate inside and outside government, particularly in recent months following a rise in domestic unrest. I mean, you can see why it might make some sense to monitor these things, true. Although, again, I am a little confused as to the decision to lay this responsibility on the postal inspectors. Okay. While posts on platforms such as Facebook and Parler have allowed law enforcement to track down and arrest rioters who assaulted the Capitol on January 6th, that seems like a good thing, such data collection has also sparked concerns about the government surveilling peaceful protesters or those engaged in protected First Amendment activities. All right. When contacted by Yahoo News, civil liberties experts expressed alarm at the post office's surveillance program. It's a mystery, said University of Chicago law professor Jeffrey Stone, whom President Barack Obama appointed to review the National Security Agency's bulk data collection in the wake of the Edward Snowden leaks. I don't understand why the government would go to the Postal Service for examining the Internet for security issues. Well, that's a good question, Professor Stone. Maybe I ought to be a professor. I ask good questions, too. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, right? Why are they doing that? The Postal Service has had a turbulent year, facing financial insolvency, the Republicans making, and allegations that its head, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who was appointed by President Donald Trump, was slowing down deliveries just as the pandemic vastly increased the number of mail-in ballots for the 2020 election. Why the post office would now move into social media surveillance, which would appear to have little to do with mail deliveries, is unclear. This seems a little bizarre, agreed Rachel Levinson-Waldman. Hey, Deputy Director of the Brennan Center for Justice's Liberty and National Security Program. No relation of mine, though perhaps related to Michael Waldman, also of the Brennan Center, but who knows. Based on the very minimal information that's available online, it appears that ICOP is meant to root out misuse of the postal system by online actors, which doesn't seem to encompass what's going on here. It's not at all clear why their mandate would include monitoring of social media that's unrelated to use of the postal system. Levinson-Waldman also questioned the legal authority of the Postal Service to monitor social media activity. If the individuals they're monitoring are carrying out or planning criminal activity, that should be the purview of the FBI, she said. If they're simply engaging in lawfully protected speech, even if it's odious or objectionable, then monitoring them on that basis raises serious constitutional concerns. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service did not respond to specific questions sent by Yahoo News about ICOP, but provided a general statement on its authorities. The U.S. Postal Inspection Service is the primary law enforcement, crime prevention, and security arm of the U.S. Postal Service, the statement said, to no avail. Thank you, but what else have you got? As such, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service has federal law enforcement officers, postal inspectors, who enforce approximately 200 federal laws to achieve the agency's mission, protect the U.S. Postal Service and its employees, infrastructure, and customers, enforce the laws that defend the nation's mail system from illegal and dangerous use, and ensure public trust in the mail. So far, nothing. The Internet Covert Operations Program is a function within the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, which assesses threats to Postal Service employees and its infrastructure by monitoring publicly available open source information, the statement said. Okay. Additionally, the Inspection Service collaborates with federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies to proactively identify and assess potential threats to the Postal Service, its employees and customers, and its overall mail processing and transportation network. In order to preserve operational effectiveness, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service does not discuss its protocols and investigative methods or tools, and they haven't done so here either. So I guess they're in keeping with their mission here. So no answer, essentially. The Postal Service isn't the only part of the government expanding its monitoring of social media. In a background call with reporters last month, DHS officials spoke about that department's involvement in monitoring social media for domestic terrorism threats. We know that this threat is fueled mainly by false narratives, conspiracy theories, and extremist rhetoric read through social media and other online platforms, one of the officials said, and that's why we're kicking off engagement directly with social media companies. That's actually a different topic and troublesome on its own, but also doesn't do much to explain what's going on here. I mean, it's justifiable, perhaps. I still don't understand the postal inspectors. DHS is coordinating with civil rights and civil liberties colleagues, as well as our private colleagues, to ensure that everything we're doing is being done responsibly and in line with civil rights and civil liberties and individual privacy, the official added. Stone, the University of Chicago professor, you haven't forgotten him, have you? Questioned why the post office would be tasked with something like identifying violent protests 2 months after the January 6th attack, which would appear to have little or nothing to do with the post office's role in delivering mail. I just don't think the Postal Service has the degree of sophistication that you would want if you were dealing with national security issues of this sort, he said. That part is puzzling. There are so many other federal agencies that could do this. I don't understand why the Post Office would be doing it. There's no need for the Post Office to do it. You've got the FBI, Homeland Security, and so on, so I don't know why the Post Office is doing this. Okay, I mean, same question over again. It may just be that they had spare manpower to do it, and I can understand, though, others would have some questions. I understand, why you would have postal inspectors share their information with fusion centers, because what what difference, what point would there be to having postal inspectors come up with this information and have no methodology for disseminating what could be valuable information across law enforcement, wherever they are and wherever they sit? But yeah, in the first place, having postal inspectors doing it and justifying it by saying, well, there could be a threat to the mail. If the Proud Boys had at some point said, let's beat the crap out of postal delivery people to stop the mail, then I guess they would have a clear thing. And maybe they do hear that and they didn't want to reveal it at some point. But yeah, to now it's a mystery, and it's weird and worrying and disturbing, and you don't want to have Louis DeJoy having any fingers in that pie. So I can understand the concern. We'll see whether more details emerge in the days to come. Or perhaps on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Okay, well, he'll start off with a story that we still haven't spoken to yet, but many of you have seen online. John Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy, the current one, actually thinking that he could get one over on and get a gotcha question past Stacey Abrams. I wonder why he thought Stacey Abrams, of all people, would be unprepared.